I paid for my mother's childhood home to be completely restored, $275,000 out of my own pocket, not a single dollar from anyone else in the family. And when I pulled into the driveway on her 60th birthday, my brother's truck was already there, backed up to the side gate with the cargo door open and a man I'd never seen before walking the perimeter of the backyard with a measuring tape. My name is Ivy. I'm 32. I work in financial compliance for a mid-sized insurance firm in Austin, which means I spend my days reading the fine print that other people skim past. I know how documents are structured to protect the person who drafted them. I know which clauses hold in court and which ones fold the moment someone with a financial interest starts applying pressure. I didn't get into this line of work by accident. My mother grew up in a 3-bedroom craftsman-style house in coastal Georgia, Tybee Island area, about 20 minutes outside of Savannah. Her parents bought it in 1978 for less than $40,000. When her father passed, he left it to her and my uncle in equal shares. My uncle sold his half to my mother for a price that was generous on paper and punishing in practice, and she spent the next 15 years making payments on a house she'd already grown up in, while also raising 2 kids mostly on her own after my father left when I was 9. She held on to it. That's the thing about my mother. She holds on. She held on to that house the way you hold on to proof that something in your life was solid and real before everything got complicated. But she hadn't been able to afford the upkeep. The porch was rotting in 2 places. The kitchen hadn't been updated since the early 90s. The master bath had a shower that required a step-up and a grab for the curtain rod that she'd been warned 3 times by her doctor not to do anymore. She has rheumatoid arthritis in both knees. She's been managing it for 8 years, and she manages it the way she manages everything, quietly, without asking anyone for help, making small adjustments to her life that she never announces. I started setting money aside when I was 26. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my brother. I found a contractor through a professional contact, someone who specialized in accessibility renovation and historic preservation, which matters on Tybee Island because the local historic district has opinions about what you can and cannot alter on the exterior of a home. I pulled the permits myself. I coordinated everything remotely during a period of 8 months, flying down twice to walk the site. 0 threshold entry from the garage, a walk-in shower with a teak bench and grab bars that look like architectural details, not medical equipment. A lowered kitchen counter section on the east wall where she likes to prep food. New porch boards, same profile as the originals. The original hardwood floors refinished instead of replaced. I wanted it to feel like itself, only cared for, only safe. Total cost after everything, permits, materials, labor, landscaping, new HVAC system, $275,000. I also prepaid 3 years of property taxes because I know how quickly a fixed income situation can become precarious when a surprise bill shows up in January. I put the deed into a revocable living trust with my mother named as sole trustee and primary beneficiary, with a successor trustee arrangement that would protect her in the event she was ever unable to manage her own affairs. I worked with an estate attorney in Savannah who came highly recommended by a colleague. The trust terms were explicit. The property was for her personal residential use. No commercial activity. No short-term rental. No subletting of any kind without written approval from the successor trustee, which was me. The plan for her birthday was simple. I told her I was taking her out for dinner at a restaurant she'd been wanting to try in downtown Savannah, the kind of place she'd look up and save and never actually spend the money on for herself. My cousin, who lives 40 minutes away and knew the real plan, agreed to get her dressed up and into the car. I drove down the day before and had a small group of her closest friends already inside the house when we arrived. When she walked through the front door, she stopped in the middle of the entry and put one hand flat against the wall like she needed to confirm the house was real. She ran her fingers along the refinished wood trim. She walked to the kitchen and opened every cabinet in order. She stood in the doorway of the master bath for a long time without saying anything, and then she turned around and said, quietly, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," I told her. "That's why I did it." We spent the evening eating takeout on the new porch while the sun went down over the marsh. Her friends stayed until 9. My mother reorganized the pantry twice before bed because that's what she does when she's happy and doesn't know where to put it. I drove back to Austin the following Tuesday. I should have known that kind of happiness has a way of becoming visible. My mother called my brother the same week. She's never been good at keeping good news inside when she's truly feeling it, and told him about the house. He asked for the address. She gave it to him without thinking twice, because he's her son, and she's spent 60 years believing that information shared with family is information shared safely. He texted me 2 days later, "Heard you did something big with Mom's house. Can't wait to see it. When's a good time to visit?" I told him I'd check with her and get back to him. I didn't think much of it. My brother, whose name is Garrett, is 5 years older than me, lives in Charlotte and has a history of having large ideas about money that belong to other people. His wife, Sandra, is the kind of person who walks through someone else's home the way a buyer walks through an open house, appraising square footage, calculating renovation costs, considering what it might net on the market. I'd seen that look before. I chose to believe this was different because they were family and the house was legally protected, and I was tired of being suspicious of the people I was supposed to trust. I was wrong about the middle part and deliberately optimistic about the rest. The voicemail from my mother came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing a claims audit. She never calls before 9, so when I saw the timestamp, 7:52 a.m., I stepped into the hallway before I even pressed play. "Ivy, it's Mom. I'm fine, don't worry. But Garrett was here this weekend, him and Sandra and the kids, and I think—" She paused. "I think you need to call me when you have a minute. There's something Sandra left on the kitchen table. A packet of papers. I didn't agree to any of it, and I don't really understand what I'm looking at." I called her back immediately. She described the documents as best she could: a property management agreement with a short-term rental company based in Savannah, projections showing the house could earn between $38,000 and $52,000 per year on platforms like Vrbo and Airbnb, and a one-page summary of what the management company would handle. At the bottom of the summary, in the signature line for the property owner, someone had already filled in my mother's name in typed text. The line was blank, but her name was already there. I was in my car within 40 minutes. I had a 7-hour drive and I used the first 2 of them to make phone calls. I reached the house on a Friday evening. Garrett's SUV was in the driveway. The side gate was unlatched. When I walked through to the backyard, Sandra was standing on the new porch taking photographs on her phone, methodically, the way someone documents a property for a listing rather than the way someone takes pictures at a family gathering. She heard me come through the gate and lowered her phone and smiled. The specific smile I'd seen my whole life that meant she'd already decided how the conversation was going. "You made it," she said. "Garrett's inside?" I went in through the back door. My mother was at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She looked at me the way she looks at me when she's been holding something heavier than she should have to, for longer than she should have had to. My brother was in the living room on his phone. He came in when he heard the door. "We were going to call you," he said. "We just wanted to get a feel for the space first." I set my bag on the counter. I asked my mother if she was okay. She nodded slowly. "Where's the packet?" I said. She got up and retrieved it from the kitchen counter. I read through it standing up. The property management company was Coastal Luxury Rentals, registered in Chatham County. The projections were real. I recognized the format. I've reviewed enough of these in professional contexts to know the numbers weren't fabricated. They were just applied to a property that wasn't available for what they were proposing. The signature line with my mother's pre-filled name was on page 4. Garrett leaned against the doorframe. "Look," he said, "nobody's trying to cut you out. You put in serious money, and that deserves to be recognized. But you've also created a real asset here, and right now it's just sitting there 9 months out of the year." "It's not sitting there," I said. "She lives here. She doesn't need it full-time. She could stay with us in Charlotte during the rental season, come back when it's slow. The management company handles everything. She wouldn't have to. I put the packet back on the table. I need you both to sit down, I said. There was a pause. Sandra came in from the porch. My mother stayed where she was. Garrett and Sandra sat at the kitchen table. I went to my car and retrieved the accordion folder I'd packed before I left Austin. I placed the first document on the table. The trust agreement, recorded with the Chatham County Clerk of Court's office, naming my mother as sole trustee and primary beneficiary. I read the relevant section aloud. The provision prohibiting any commercial use of the property, including short-term rental, subletting, or use as a venue for any compensatory purpose without written consent of the successor trustee. Garrett glanced at it. Trust language can be amended, he said. I placed the second document beside the first. A written legal opinion from the estate attorney who drafted the trust, confirming that the document was valid, properly recorded, and enforceable under Georgia state law. The opinion specifically noted that the trust could not be modified without my mother's consent and the consent of the successor trustee, and that any third party who attempted to enter into a commercial agreement using the property without that consent could be held liable for tortious interference. I then placed the third document on the table, a screenshot of a draft verbal listing that had been created 3 days earlier. The listing included photographs taken from the backyard of my mother's house, the new porch, the marsh view, the refinished exterior, and described the property as a charming coastal craftsman with designer renovation, minutes from Tybee Island beaches. The listing was attached to an account registered to Sandra's email address. The account had not yet published the listing, but the draft existed, with those photographs, taken without my mother's permission, on a platform I had already flagged. Sandra's expression didn't change exactly. It recalibrated. I placed the fourth document beside that one, a summary of the Tybee Island short-term rental ordinance, which requires a short-term vacation rental license from the city of Savannah, a certificate of occupancy inspection, a local contact available 24 hours a day, and a transient occupancy tax registration. The application process takes a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. No application had been filed. No license existed. Operating without one carried fines of up to $1,000 per day. And then I placed the fifth document, a cease and desist letter drafted and signed by the estate attorney addressed jointly to Garrett and Sandra, notifying them that any further attempt to list, market, photograph for commercial purposes, misrepresent ownership or control of Wantzam, or enter into any commercial agreement involving the property at that address would be treated as tortious interference with the trust and would be pursued through civil litigation. The kitchen was quiet in a way that had weight to it. "We're family," Garrett said, his voice had gone flat. "Yes," I said, "and that's her house, your guests in it. Right now, your guests who've taken unauthorized photographs of it for a commercial listing, presented documents to its owner implying a transaction she hadn't agreed to, and drafted a rental listing using a platform account registered to your email. I would like you both to leave now. You're welcome to visit when she invites you. That invitation is not mine to give or take away. But what happens with this property is..." What followed was not quiet. Garrett made phone calls in the driveway. Sandra spent a long time in the bathroom. When they finally left, their kids, 2 boys under 10, who had spent the whole afternoon playing in the backyard completely unaware of any of it, looked confused in the way kids look when the adults around them have been using a language they don't understand. My mother made tea. We sat on the porch while the marsh turned gold in the early evening light. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "He asked me last weekend if I'd ever thought about downsizing. He said a house this size was a lot to manage on my own." She paused. "I told him I'd just had it renovated. He said that made it worth more." I didn't say anything. She looked out at the water. "I thought he was just being practical." She set her mug down. "I should have called you right away." "You called me when it mattered," I said. She shook her head slightly, the way she does when she's deciding not to argue. Inside, on the kitchen counter, I left a folder with a copy of the trust document, the attorney's contact card, and a one-page summary I'd typed up myself of what the trust meant in plain language, who had authority to make decisions about the property, what was and wasn't permitted, and what number to call if anyone ever came to her again with paperwork she didn't recognize. Before I left the following Sunday, I arranged to have a property management system installed. Not a rental management system, a home security and monitoring system. Cameras at the front door, back gate, and garage entry, all feeding to an app on both my phone and my mother's tablet. A smart lock on the front door with a code she chose herself. I walked her through the app while she sat at the kitchen table. She watched the camera feeds cycle through on the screen with an expression I recognized from my childhood, the look she gets when she's learning something new that she knows will be useful, fully focused, not overwhelmed. She tapped the camera icon for the back gate. "That's where the man with the measuring tape was," she said. I didn't know what to say to him. "You don't have to say anything to anyone," I told her. "That's what the camera is for. You see something that doesn't feel right, you call me and you lock the door." She practiced the lock code 3 times until she had it without looking. 2 weeks later, Garrett sent an email with the subject line, "Let's clear the air." It was 4 paragraphs. He said he'd approached the situation poorly and that he recognized the house was hers to make decisions about. He said he hoped we could move past it for the sake of the family. He did not mention the draft listing. He did not mention the signature line with her name already typed in. He did not mention Sandra at all. I read it once, moved it to a folder labeled documentation, and didn't reply. Sandra texted my mother 3 weeks after the visit with a recipe she thought she might like. My mother showed it to me on the phone. She said, "Should I respond?" I told her that was entirely up to her. It was her relationship to manage. She thought about it for a moment and said, "I think I'll wait and see." That's how she is. She doesn't close doors, she just stops standing in front of them. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening about a month after everything settled. She'd had a good day rheumatology appointment with a doctor she likes, lunch after with a friend who lives a few streets over, spent the afternoon on the porch reading. She told me that her friend had said the porch looked like something out of a magazine. She laughed when she said it. Then she said something I've thought about almost every day since. "You know what I kept thinking when Garrett was here?" She didn't wait for me to answer. "I kept thinking I should be more flexible. I should find a way to make this work for everyone. I spent so long trying to take up less space so there would be more room for everyone else." She was quiet for a moment. "And then you walked in with that folder." I smiled into the phone. "I didn't do it to make a point," I said. "I know," she said. "That's what made it mean something." I grew up watching my mother negotiate herself smaller. Give up the last piece. Take the inconvenient shift. Accept the impractical arrangement because someone else needed the practical one. She did it so smoothly that I think she eventually mistook it for preference, as though she genuinely didn't mind, as though the smallest portion was the one she would have chosen anyway. She didn't restore that house. I did. But she's the one who held on to it for 30 years while everyone else found reasons to let things go. The house is hers. The decision about what it's used for is hers. The porch where she reads in the afternoon, and the kitchen counter where she preps her meals, and the walk-in shower that doesn't require her to grab a curtain rod for balance. All of it is hers. In a document, in a county record, in a trust that exists specifically so that no one can make her feel like a guest in her own life. I thought a lot about what I understood before all of this versus what I understand now. I used to believe that protecting people you love meant absorbing whatever came at them, that if you named a boundary you were somehow introducing conflict where there didn't have to be any. What I know now is that a boundary isn't an act of aggression, it's an act of architecture. It holds the shape of what you're trying to protect. I restored that house because I could see clearly what my mother had earned and I wanted to make it real and lasting and safe. I brought that folder because when someone mistakes a gift for an opportunity, the most loving thing you can do is be very specific about what it is and who it belongs to. If you've ever built something for someone you love, with your own time, your own money, your own careful attention, and then had to stand between it and the people who saw in it something other than what you put there, you already know that protecting a gift is not the same as being possessive. Sometimes it's the only way to make sure the love you built it with is actually what reaches them. I keep coming back to the moment my mother pressed her hand flat against the wall when she first walked through the restored front door. Not to steady herself, just to feel that it was real. She'd held on to that house for 30 years through a divorce, through 2 kids, through medical bills and property tax notices, and a kitchen that hadn't been updated since I was in elementary school. She held on the way people hold on to things that represent something larger than the thing itself. Proof that a life had been lived somewhere specific, that it had roots, that it hadn't just dissolved into circumstance. And then the moment someone else recognized the value of what she'd preserved, the instinct in the room shifted from protection to extraction. That's what I've been sitting with. Not anger at my brother or his wife, exactly, though what they did was wrong and they knew it was wrong, which is why the draft listing existed before any conversation happened. What I've been sitting with is the question of why it's so easy for people to look at something someone else built with their own hands and their own sacrifice and see, first and most clearly, what it could yield. I think the answer has something to do with the difference between people who do things and people who position themselves near things that are done. Garrett has always been good at the second part. He shows up after the work is finished, reads the room, and starts calculating. There's a kind of intelligence in that, actually, but it's intelligence without integrity, and intelligence without integrity is just a more sophisticated version of taking what isn't yours. What I've learned, what this whole thing clarified for me in a way that I don't think I could have arrived at any other way, is that doing the right thing requires all 3 of those qualities working together. It's not enough to care about someone. Caring without the knowledge to protect them, without the willingness to actually show up and do the hard thing, produces good intentions that get walked over. I cared about my mother for years before I understood how to make that care structurally real. A trust, a deed, a legal opinion, a cease and desist. The caring was always there. The knowledge and the follow-through took time to build. My mother spent her life being the person who absorbed whatever was inconvenient so that other people could have the convenient version. She did it so consistently that I think she stopped noticing she was doing it. What changed? What I hope stays changed is that she now has a document that reflects a different reality. One that says her name, grants her unconditional authority over her own home, and cannot be altered by anyone who walks in, claiming to have better ideas about what her life should look like. She practiced the lock code 3 times until she had it without looking. That image stays with me. Something as simple as a door code, and she practiced it like it mattered, because it did. Because for the first time in a long time, the thing being locked was unambiguously hers. I didn't restore that house to make a point. I did it because I could see clearly what she'd earned and I wanted to make it permanent. The folder I brought was just the part where I made sure it stayed that way.